Okay. Good. Okay. Right. I think we're starting. We've had a few technical challenges, but we're going to start anyway. So I'm going to, good, Ryan is here. Hello, Ryan, very nice to see you. I'm Frances Crook, I'm the Chief Executive of the Howard League for Penal Reform, and I want to welcome everybody to this session, this conversation we're going to have with Soo Brizell and Superintendent Ryan Doyle, from Make Amends and from Devon and Cornwall Police, as you can see with the very fancy uniform there. So what we're going to do is just have a chat for 45 minutes. We haven't had any questions sent in, which is fine. I'm happy because I'm happy to ask the questions that I want to ask. First of all, I want to just ask about you. Make Amends won a prize, and the Howard League gives awards every year for projects around the country which reduce crime, which keep people out of the criminal justice system, and which support victims. And your award, which we gave, was for your restorative justice work. And so I want, first of all, to ask you very, very simply for you to explain what your project does. Very simply, who's going to start?
I'm happy to start, Ryan, if that's okay. So Make Amends is a restorative justice service which is commissioned by the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office to deliver restorative justice across Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And I guess what makes us unique as well is we deliver our service in partnership with Shekinah, which is a local homeless charity. So it kind of adds value to our offer.
Ryan, you've got to take yourself off mute and just join in when you feel like it. We're very informal here.
God, I've been muted by yourself, sorry.
Oh, have we?
No. I'm
not that we're controlling or anything.
It's nice to be told what to do for a change. So no, so from a CJ, so my role in Devon and Cornwall is I'm head of criminal justice and custody department. So the custody bit is fairly straightforward. We have custody centres across the force area, which, as you expect with most police services, are your standard custody centres really. Criminal justice department covers a whole wide range of things, anything to do with victims, witnesses, reducing reoffending from diversions, and restorative justice falls under that as well. Essentially, anybody who's affected by crime or the criminal justice process, there is a team or a part of our department that deals with that. There has been a big push for Devon and Cornwall as an organisation over probably the last 7 or 8 years, but certainly more concentration in the last 3 or 4 years around recognising vulnerability, prevention, safeguarding, and stopping people from coming into that system. And it's interesting to sit as the head of a criminal justice and custody department, where actually most of the work that we invest in is about rather than prosecuting people and being based on figures solely, is about how do we stop people coming into our criminal justice system? How do we stop people returning to custody? And how do we use entry into the system as an opportunity for the service, along with partners in the APCC, to recognise vulnerability? And what's brilliant about Make Amends is that it involves us and brings Devon and Cornwall Police into that conversation, into delivery of restorative justice, but more tangible outcomes around things like prevention, vulnerability, trauma-informed policing and processes, and actually making sure that people are no longer or aren't going to continue to be affected by crime, whether that be as a victim, as a witness, or as a perpetrator.
That's great, thank you. It's interesting. I'm a great fan of restorative justice, restorative approaches, and it was, of course, it was the system was developed by police in New Zealand and Australia, based on Maori practices in the villages there, and the police have always pioneered it across Canada, UK, and other countries. So it's good to see that you're in Devon and Cornwall is pioneering it in your local area. For those who don't know much about restorative justice, although I think I'm sure a lot of people listening will be experts, but for those who don't, just give me very simply what the principles are that underpin the work. Why is it different to everything else?
So I guess, first of all, it's not punitive. So it's, you know, restorative. It does what it says on the label, and it essentially provides an opportunity for safe communication between those who've been harmed by crime and those who have harmed. And it's a process, it's a restorative process whereby, you know, certainly my team of amazing practitioners work really hard to manage risk, safety, safeguarding, and working within the principles of restorative justice, created this opportunity for positive communication. So, you know, enabling the person who's been harmed to have their voice heard, which is often lost in the criminal justice system. So to have their voice heard, to be understood, to be able to share with the person who's harmed them the impact that the crime has had on them. And it gives closure. It gives them the opportunity to have their questions answered. And importantly as well, for the person who was harmed, it's an opportunity to understand the impact of their crime. And we do know that, and research has shown that actually restorative justice can help reduce reoffending. And, you know, so the kind of the impacts of restorative justice are far reaching, you know, from the kind of those involved in the crime to, you know, the family, people who've witnessed the crime, to the wider society. So there's all sorts of benefits to it, really.
It's interesting. I had a meeting yesterday, funny enough, with the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Justice, and was talking about restorative justice to her, and how the criminal justice system has made things worse for everybody for the last 200 or 300, 400 years, and how restorative justice is an opportunity to make things better. Very simply, it's about making things better for everybody.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything to add, Ron? Are we muting you, or are you muting?
No, I'm muting myself.
You're so disciplined.
Yeah, it comes from working at home and having children that will be arriving back from school at some point. So you don't want to hear the army coming in the back door. No, I totally agree with what you said. So there are times where through the criminal justice system, actually, offenders being brought to justice for really serious offences, those who cause really high harm, actually that kind of crown court punitive part of the system it is necessary and is required to keep people harm. But that's not the bulk of the kind of stuff that policing and society as a whole deals with. What restorative justice is about is a far more mature, considered, reasoned, holistic approach to preventing harm. So not just dealing with offending and dealing with crime, but actually preventing harm, which is kind of what we should be about. And certainly in Devon and Cornwall we are, hence why we work so closely with Soo and her amazing team.
That's great. That's fantastic. I want to challenge you a bit, because as I said, I'm a fan of restorative ideas, but too often in our system it's used as an add-on, as an addition. So it's an extra punishment in a way, which is not what it's meant to be at all. It's meant to be a completely different way of doing things. Is your project different in that way, or is it actually, is it a diversion, or is it an additional imposition on someone? Who's going to handle that?
So I'll kick off and then I'll pass to Soo for the detail. But it's not an either or. So what's really important is there is no kind of one size fits all, and that's why I talk about that mature, considered approach to this. So it can be used on its own, or it can be used in addition to. There's a number of ways we consider it, but Soo's team do all the hard work, so she'll give the detail.
No, I think you're right, Ryan. I think it's neither one nor the other, and I think it very much depends as well at what point sort of a referral is made into Make Amends, a consideration for restorative justice, in which case then it may be that it's an add-on into, you know, interventions that have already happened with, you know, with someone who has committed crime. Well, I think, you know, ultimately it's more about the impact it has, and better that it's offered than not at all. And I think if we think about the revised victim code of practice, for example, whereby, quite clearly now it's giving every victim the right to receive restorative justice. So therefore, almost the kind of the question as to where it fits sort of almost becomes not as important, should we say, because what the important thing is that it's offered. And it gives sort of, the victim that opportunity really to guide their, kind of their journey through the criminal justice system, giving a little bit more kind of more involvement and empowerment, really,
Let's talk about how you actually deliver it, because I've got some interesting questions coming up in the chat, and I can't respond to them all, but they look really interesting. I can see them. One of the things you highlight in the explanation when you got your award was the intensive training that you give to your staff to deliver restorative justice, and it's very clear that the research that I've seen over years is that the more principled and the more expert, the more effective it is. So can you talk about the training that you give to staff and volunteers? Because it's okay for staff in some ways, but it's a big ask for volunteers to do that kind of intensive training. And sometimes, some ways, just to change your mindset about how you see things. Tell me what you do.
It's a really interesting and timely question, Francis, because we've just been talking about this in a team meeting this morning about how to, post-pandemic, how do we re-engage the volunteers who have gone a little bit quiet for obvious reasons, in the last 12 months. And what we kind of agreed as a team was, regardless of whether somebody is paid or not, there's still an expectation around levels of service. So I, as a victim of crime, would hope to receive the same level and standard of restorative, restorative service, regardless of whether somebody was a paid practitioner or not. So it's around standards, it's around meeting expectations, it's around, it's such an important role to be involved in someone's life who's been harmed by crime. So therefore, it's really important to invest the right skills and development and support for everybody involved. So whether that's kind of a paid practitioner or volunteers. And our service now originally started purely sort of on a model working with volunteers sort of 5 years ago. And we've progressed now to where, kind of with the support of OPCC, we have a team of paid practitioners as well as volunteers. And those volunteers will work alongside our practitioners kind of from a case management point of view. So why wouldn't we invest the same training and the same level of skills development with a volunteer as we would do with a paid member of staff?
And Ryan, how does that work with the police? How much knowledge and understanding in your force and in your police services there about restorative solutions, restorative justice, and the principles or the way to work?
It's improving, which is a lot thing. So, and we have to be honest. It's not a new thing, but the drive around it is something that we have to keep on top of. I'd be lying if I said every officer fully embraces it and is putting, referrals all the time, because they don't. But the important thing is that knowledge is improving. Those conversations continue. So we have regular. The meeting's called the Victim and Witness Delivery Group. So the nomenclature isn't great, but it's what's important is that is a regular meeting where you have all of the crime managers, chief inspectors from various departments and geographies across the force, along with Sue and her colleague Mark, and guys from our performance and analysis department and our victim care unit and witness care unit, looking at how are we doing on a month-by-month basis in terms of supporting people affected by crime. How's our compliance with VCOP looking? How are our referrals into restorative justice? And what else can we do to keep improving that? So we're doing pretty well. We've got a brilliant team, obviously, at Amends who we work with, and we are improving. And what's important is that it's something that is, like Sue said, that investment and that effort continues because it's really important.
Yeah. So
I guess,
no, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, from my point of view as well, Francis, we can see the value in that sort of that effort and what's happening within the police, from the referrals that we receive from within, you know, from various departments within the police, you know, to training. You know, I've been really fortunate to be able to sit with the IOM team for Devon and Cornwall as part of a CPD
You mustn't
day.
use acronyms.
Sorry. Integrated Offender Management team as part of their development day. And it was great, you know, where you kind of, you know, sort of sat speaking with, you know, various police officers about restorative justice, and, you know, kind of seeing where people are thinking about people they're working with and how would restorative justice work for them. And I've just seen something pop up in the chat from Mark Meyer. He's our RJ coordinator within the police. So we're lucky that we've got a bridge as well between, you know, Make Amends and, you know, the police force. And he works tirelessly to, you know, to help promote, raise awareness, support any questions that the police might have before referral or whatever. So as a model, it works really well.
So any police officer can refer a case into your service, is that right?
If it's you know, if it's felt appropriate, you know, and at the very least, what they will do is speak with the RJ coordinator within the police, who kind of, you know, there's a sort of like I guess almost an internal system for referrals within the police, and that works, you know, really well, having our RJ coordinator kind of linking us in.
There's two. I hadn't spotted Mark hiding in the audience. So welcome, Mark. I'm glad you're here. So there's two really good examples of that as well. So obviously Mark sits in that delivery group that I spoke about. But we so Pathfinder, which is our deferred caution and deferred charge scheme, they are one of our biggest referrals into restorative justice. So that shows that kind of that consideration, how we keep people out of the system, and then using restorative justice as one of the tools, one of the tactics that's there to help that happen. The other thing that Mark played a big part in as well, which was really interesting, is two and a half years ago, nearly 3 years ago, we set up a new part of our new operating model within the force, where we had a unit set up to look at desktop investigations. So when all the demand is coming into the police service, into those initial crimes being reported to call centres, having a team working at the front end to see actually where can we deal with and add value to crime reports the minute they come into the organisation. And actually there's stuff that we can do remotely and do in a desktop fashion, which frees up response teams and investigators to spend more time with the people that need more time. Mark was, as part of setting those teams up, Mark delivered training to the new team, so that the minute they're doing that initial desktop investigation around crimes and thinking about what happens to them, they're thinking, actually, we're not going to pass this to an investigator, but we will make a referral into restorative justice. And you can see, when we look at the monthly figures in terms of referrals, you can see if Mark's been to an area to do training, that month their referrals spike. so it's really important.
That's really interesting. I want to go on and talk about victims, because I mean, Sue, you mentioned victims, and obviously, I know one of the reasons you got the award, the prize, was because we were impressed with the work that you do with victims. Tell me a bit about that, and I also want you to give me a case story, if you can, of because I know you deal with some very distressing and quite difficult crimes as well. I mean, people think of restorative justice as being sort of the easier crimes, the less serious crimes, but actually I know the projects around the country working with some of the most difficult, stressing, and sometimes where there's even been a death. So tell me about the work you do with victims, and give me a story that will illustrate the kind of work that you do.
Okay.
Sue,
okay, so the team at Make Amends are hugely passionate, skilled, and experienced in the work that they do, and each of our practitioners has a particular area of interest with regards to developing kind of a keen interest in addition to restorative justice. Now, that might be with young people, it might be around hate crime, domestic abuse, and and others. So I think, for us, for the work around victims, it's really important that we offer a sort of like a holistic service. So one of the values in working in partnership with Shekinah is we can signpost into support for accommodation, employment, training, anything kind of around additional needs. So very much kind of working with people with multiple disadvantage, we're able to work very closely with a couple of really key organisations. So it becomes more than just restorative justice, really. It's kind of everything else, and that can be evidenced in feedback that we receive from those people that we've been working with. And I guess sort of, just to highlight that, we've just supported one of our practitioners as a level 3 IDVA worker. So when we're working with domestic abuse,
that's another acronym.
Not that we're taking the role of an IDVA kind of role. So
what's an IDVA?
So independent domestic violence kind of sort of support worker. And so it's not about us doing that role, Francis. It's about actually we now have the knowledge within the team. So if we see a gap in provision for somebody who's been affected by domestic abuse and we're working with them from an RJ perspective, then we're able to kind of see where the gaps are perhaps, and then work more closely with in a multi-agency approach. Now, with regards to our award for restorative approaches, we work across all crime types, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we will accept all crime, sort of all the cases that are referred to us. It very much depends on sort of, risk, further risk of harm, etc. What I will say is that we do work with kind of, high-end crime, the more serious and violent crime. And in response to that, we've just about to start in mid-May 2 additional practitioners who are focusing on serious and violent crime, particularly working with young people and families. So we'll have one additional worker in Plymouth and one in Torbay. And that's very much been in response to kind of the data that we're seeing around serious and violent crime. So to give you an example of kind of, of where we've worked, I think you kind of mentioned about where there's been, kind of a death. One case that springs to mind was around a road traffic accident, and working with the mother of of the person who lost his life due to a road traffic accident, and the person who was driving the car. And I think kind of where most mums might be kind of wanting some form of retribution or whatever, this very, very brave lady wanted to meet the person who was driving the car. And through a very long and lengthy and very carefully managed process, we sort of we had a conference with with both parties, and and basically kind of what she was saying is her son's life has been taken, but why take the life, why should somebody else lose their life through spending so much time kind of in prison and not having any type of future? So by kind of having those conversations, the kind of the young man who was responsible for the crime served his time, but is now kind of sort of have a bit more of a positive kind of future, shall we say. Still, he's living with the consequences of his actions. However, I think importantly for mum, she has closure, and and that young man is now able to sort of to move on. He will still be experiencing the impact of his crime, that will never go away, but he's served his time now, and it's about understanding what was actually going on for him when that crime happened, and real closure for for this young man's mum as well, when she's lost her son. So, and the team worked in such a compassionate way with this lady, and we're able to sort of to bring in other services around. I think the kind of this happened over in Cornwall. So actually this is more than just about bringing two people to to the table, so to speak. It's around real kind of restorative conversations, looking at risk, looking at what is going to make it sort of what we don't want to create any more harm. So it just gives an example really of kind of why the training, coming back to the comment made earlier, Francis, why training is so important. We can train and upskill all our practitioners and volunteers in restorative justice, but it's really important for me as a service manager to make sure that our practitioners and volunteers access other forms of training as well. So we've just done the training around grief and suicide, because actually sort of these are the things that really enhance our our practice and our service delivery.
That's fabulous. That's really interesting. So you talk as if you talk about people, you talk with humanity, and as if it's a really human thing, and a loving, caring service, which you just don't hear in the criminal justice system anywhere. It's a humanity-free zone a lot of the time. Ryan, do you want to add anything?
Trying to get to my mute button. To be honest, I don't think I can add anything more to what Sue says. You said how brilliant they are, but it's really, other than to say, really heartening to hear your reflections around that human side, how the humility that comes with it, and the understanding, because that's why we've been doing this, and that's why we're so, as a force, so supportive of it and so wedded to it.
Thanks. I want to, I mean, moving on from that, but on something quite similar. There's been a sort of growth and awareness recently of something called trauma informed. And you use it when you talk about it's a phrase that I've seen you use, Sue, and I know the police are using it a lot and doing a lot of training generally, not just with restorative justice or this project, but generally with training with their officers, and particularly I think with new officers. What does it mean? And I'm going to be controversial, I'm going to push you a bit, is being trauma informed just an excuse? Ryan, you go first.
Yeah, so the short answer is no. I don't think it is an excuse. Actually, it links to the point we just discussed about the human aspect of this. That understand. So all of the conversation so far has been about maturity, about thoughtfulness, about understanding, and about long-term view. Not just dealing with somebody who's committed an offence and giving them a penalty or a punishment, and then at the expense of thinking about how that crime or harm has affected everybody involved. To be able to do that properly, we have to understand, part of it is understanding why it happened, and actually that's where the trauma informed part comes in. So I don't know if the name is right. You know, we didn't coin the phrase trauma play. It's not something that the police invented or we came up with a name for. But as a principle, it's about developing that understanding for why something has happened, rather than just dealing with the outcome of it. So that's why I think it's really, really important. I don't think it is excuse the pun, a cop out.
Okay, Sue?
So I think for us, when we're working with people who have been massively affected and traumatized by crime, I think there's something really important in knowing about how to best work with a person so as not to re-victimize and re-traumatize, and that's trauma informed for us. So, you know, I think particularly, you know, to use an example of maybe somebody who has been kind of sexually assaulted by a male, for example, you know, so it's about how do we approach that, making sure that we, you know, sort of we use you know, kind of females if that's what's required. And it's very much around asking the individuals themselves, you know, how can we deliver the most effective service for you? So it's not us making any assumptions from a trauma-informed space. This is about asking and having it led really by the people that we're working with. And it's just, again, about using, you know, about working kind of with, you know, with empathy, with humility, and about us not thinking that we know best, really, because it's about not being done to. You know, I think that's kind of one of the things within the criminal justice system. You kind of got no control. You are being done to the whole time because that's how the system is set up. So, you know, if restorative justice in its approach can work in, you know, to coin the phrase, a trauma-informed way, then we are doing with and not doing to. And that's really important for us as a service. And that, you know, that's how we can sort of I guess have the most positive and restorative communication and conversations with people, is just by being mindful, really, and respectful.
I mean, the Aldi's doing a lot of work at the moment with the police on trying to reduce the arrests of women, and we've got all sorts of information out, really interesting information from 5 police forces about their arrest rates of women. I mean, it's very clear that the trauma that a lot of women who end up in being arrested by the police have experienced is quite extraordinary, and they're overwhelmingly victims, and then they get arrested, sometimes for committing a crime, but sometimes for being around when the crimes are being committed. Do you do special work with women, or is there specialist training, or is there specialist service, or not? Either as victims or as perpetrators.
So, well, I mean, I guess if I was just to, you know, to respond to that, So we do sort of within the team kind of look at sort of, you know, making sure that the team are, from a development point of view, I guess, accessing any training that's on offer, because we do know there's a strong kind of, you know, sort of network. If you look at the local criminal justice board, you know, there's a subgroup that is, you know, specifically for women and women offenders. So, you know, we are part of that. One of our practitioners, her area of interest is around female offenders. So we're making sure then, and by having that kind of that area of interest, that helps us access different networks that are supporting women, so we can kind of shape our services or shape our communication. So again, you know, this is just about it being then needs led. So, you know, what sort of, whether it's sort of the person harmed or the harmer, we're working in the most appropriate and safe way based on their needs.
Yeah. Ryan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm glad to see you mentioned the LCJB subgroup, so the Local Criminal Justice Board, which is, forgive my audience who has experience working with LCJBs, but it is made up of reps from all members, senior members from all members of the Criminal Justice Service in our area, and we don't have many subgroups. There's 3 subgroups at the moment, and one of those is women in the criminal justice system. So in terms of wanting to understand or wanting to develop that understanding, total recognition of the inequalities within the criminal justice system, we get that, that in terms of gender, in terms of race, and in terms of age, and we're putting some quite significant time into understanding that, and the LCJB subgroup is a really good example of how we're doing that. Make Amends being part of that as well.
I was visiting a police custody suite before lockdown, and it was a big city outside London force, and they had 64 cells, of which they were mostly full, and it was a middle of the day, and they were all full of men who'd been arrested for domestic violence and domestic abuse. And there is some evidence that restorative approaches work less well with domestic violence cases, because it's an offence which is repetitive, and people do say, men say, I'm sorry, I won't hit her again, and then they do. How do you deal with domestic violence, and if so, how? What are sort of the outcome rates for you?
So if I could just say this moment, my screen has gone blank. I don't know if it's the same for everyone. So I'll just kind of carry on.
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, so I'll just carry on talking. So we do sort of offer restorative justice for kind of those who've been involved in domestic abuse. We work really closely with those organisations who have specialist skills and expertise in domestic abuse. And I think it's important for us to say as well is that we kind of, you know, for us, it's around domestic abuse and sexual violence. And, you know, kind of where we're at the moment as a service is around positioning ourselves in local strategies around domestic abuse and sexual violence. However, what we do need to be very aware of is looking at domestic abuse through a restorative lens is kind of quite different from other crime types. So we have to work even more closely with the organisations who are referring survivors into us. It's around looking at sort of heightened risk, looking at additional safety measures. So actually, you know, whilst we do work and we will accept cases around domestic abuse, we have to work very differently and being very mindful of kinds of the motivators, kind of any mitigating factors, sort of when we're bringing kinds of 2 people together. But we also need to recognise as well around restorative justice is it's not just about bringing people into conference. So it could be about indirect restorative justice through letter writing, shuttle mediation, or whatever indeed is appropriate for what is required for that restorative intervention.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan? Just jump in if you want to say something. And you're still on mute.
Sue's absolutely right around the complexity for DA. So whether that be through restorative, through Pathfinder, deferred caution, deferred charge schemes. I know some of the forces to the east, to Hampshire, have looked at schemes around perpetrator programs. It's still a work in progress because it's a hugely complex area and it's not one that we want to get wrong.
Absolutely. Yes, that's something I definitely agree with. And moving on from that, because of course families are complicated things, as we all know. Do you work with children either as offenders or as victims? And can a child really give informed consent to participate in a restorative intervention of some kind?
So I guess, you know, if I could just sort of quickly respond to that. So yes, we do work with young people, and so I guess there's two things worth mentioning here, is that we work in partnership with the Youth Offending Service, so working with young people, both as kind of as, you know, as victims and offenders, but also if we look at kind of our generic service as well. Again, we've got our highly skilled practitioners are experienced and qualified in working with young people as well. So coming, you know, in response to your question, Francis, around whether a young person is able to consent, that again is where we work really closely with a guardian or the carer or parent, or indeed, you know, a social worker who's working with that person. So we don't proceed in, you know, with any of our cases without consent of both parties. And you know, and this is so important, and I think particularly when working with young people, because what we need to do is get it right for, you know, for whether it's the harmed or the harmer, and consent is really important. But we need to understand whether or not, you know, kind of working with young people as to whether or not they fully understand what the process is, what restorative justice is, and this is where it takes the skill of the practitioners to work really closely from a multi-agency approach as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think people will probably be aware that New Zealand is a country where we can learn a lot. We can learn a lot from New Zealand, and all sorts of different things, but particularly on youth justice, because I think, certainly last I heard, their entire youth justice system and service was based on restorative principles. They don't use this sort of the criminal justice system that is very combative that we have. Ryan, is there anything you want to say about children in particular, either as victim or as offenders?
Yeah, so we spoke earlier, didn't we, around whether RDO is being used instead of other measures or along to complement. What's really important with young people, to totally support what Sue said around same with DA not wanting to get it wrong. But what's really important with young people is because of the partnerships that we have around, and a lot of other areas do around the youth offending services. It's definitely not an either or if there's no RJ, then we're going to end up with criminalised young people. So there's a range of ways that we look at trying to prevent young people from harming or coming to harm as well. That either or conversation is really quite important with young people.
Okay, and I've got a question which I'm not sure about what I think. Usually I know exactly what I think about everything, but there's something I'm not sure about here. So you said you wanted restorative justice or restorative approaches to be available to victims as a right. Now, I don't know what I think about this, because I think it might be complicated. What happens if your offender doesn't want to, or if one member of a family is a victim and wants to participate, but other members of the families don't want to? How, I mean, giving people rights like that can sometimes interfere with other people's rights. It's quite complicated. So tell me what I should think about this. What should my opinion be on this?
Gosh, Francis, I don't say kind of what I think your opinion on anything should be, but I think you know, this is about acknowledging really that you know, sort of every victim has a right to know about restorative justice. Whether or not we're able to proceed is, you know, is a different matter. But what we have found, and you know, naturally as a service, we come up against challenges around consent, people wanting a certain outcome with regards to restorative justice, and you know, managing expectations is a big part of what we do. So I think there is something about recognizing that, you know, whilst everyone has the right, sometimes that right might not be exercised kind of fully, really. And I guess one of the things that we recognize within the service is sometimes it can be as meaningful to have those initial conversations with somebody, and that in itself can be restorative. And therefore, you know, at least somebody has been heard, has been listened to, and maybe has had some of the questions answered without it going sort of the full distance, so to speak. So I think it's just about recognizing really that, you know, I think particularly for, you know, for a victim, lots is taken away from you if you've been kind of harmed by crime. And, you know, and what we're saying here is restorative justice can help just kind of help with healing, really. So, you know, let's explore it. If it's not right, we make that, you know, we will make that decision. We've got, you know, the excellent support of, you know, our J coordinator within the police. I think Ryan mentioned earlier about the Pathfinder team, who we work really closely with, sort of in Devon and Cornwall. So it's about us kind of collectively working together on, you know, whether or not this is safe, what can we do if people aren't keen to engage, and how best can we still offer a service, but for those who want it and are ready for it.
Thank you. I agree with you. I do think that. Are you happy with that, Ryan?
Yeah, very much so. And that flexibility in approach is important, isn't it? So actually, this is, you know, the victims should have a right to restorative processes, but that's not saying they have a right to sit down in the same room as the person that committed the offence and have a direct face-to-face conversation with them. The nuance is different, and actually there are, you know, the restorative processes can be looked at in other ways. So I think it's right, they have that right.
Our awards are going to be, this year's awards are going to be announced next week. So I'm hoping that people will be looking out for that. So my final question is just what for the future? What's your future? Is your funding secure? This is your opportunity to make, you know, to put in a funding bid for secure funding for the future. So often you hear of these wonderful schemes and projects, and then, you know, 3 years later, oh, we've had the funding cut. So, you know, let's keep the money flowing, please, for the things that work and the things that are effective. But tell me what do you see for the future?
So I guess, you know, certainly our vision is to become a centre of excellence whereby we can make amends. Isn't necessarily going to become a service of, you know, 30, 40, 50 practitioners necessarily. However, through working in partnership and a real collaborative approach, we can kind of really grow our offer really to you know, to victims of crime. And I think for us, from a sustainability perspective, you know, Police and Crime Commissioner's Office have just secure or offered sort of a contract for a strategic partner across Devon and Cornwall. So, you know, for us, it's about working closely and aligning ourselves with the strategic partner to ensure that we've got sustainability, we've got growth opportunities, but also we need to be looking as a service around where else the funding is. And I think to grow a service isn't necessarily about having lots of money, which I know sounds a bit bizarre, but actually by working collaboratively, we can kind of, you know, we can share resources, we can share, you know, we can share policies, procedures and that kind of thing, you know, and just to give an example of that, you know, we're having conversations at the moment with having practitioners co-located within the police, you know, and that's an amazing opportunity for us, and there'll be benefits on both, you know, on both sides without there being any additional costs. So I think it's about thinking creatively, to be honest. So in order to make the service grow is about us thinking creatively and working collaboratively, and I'm a big fan of that.
Fantastic. Ryan, you're very young to be a superintendent. And you know what they say about police officers. What I'm worried about is you're a high flyer, clearly. You know, you'll go on to bigger and greater things, you know. But so I hope that you're committed to continuing as a champion across the force, because the voluntary sector, you know, you as Sue has just said, to work collaboratively, you need champions in the force. So I hope you're committed to that too.
Very much so, and look, this isn't. It's very kind of you to say such nice things, but not about me as an individual as a head of department. As a force, Devon and Cornwall is absolutely signed up to this. Sue mentioned the strategic delivery partner for victims. That's a 10-year contract that the OPCC has just awarded.
Oh.
So this is setting us as a partnership, OPCC, the force, and the strategic partner for the next 10 years working together. The investment that is being made in the force in terms of our vulnerability focus has continued to grow over the last couple of years in terms of staffing, leadership, our operating model, and our new force. Sue used the word sustainable as well. Our new force vision that our Chief Constable launched about being a world-class sustainable force. We talk about centre of excellence, sustainability, not just in terms of green agenda, but in terms of actually investing in things at work, keeping things at work going, and having a sustainable model that prevents harm is absolutely what the force is signed up to, at least for the next 10 years.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and well done, Make Amends and Devon and Cornwall Police. Fantastic work, really encouraging to hear about it all. For those of you listening and participating in this, thank you so much for your chat. There's been a lot of conversation going on. I've got two last things to say. One is support the Howard League for Penal Reform, because we're independent, we don't take government funding for our work. So please support us, look at our website. And secondly, go and vote. That's my final message to everybody. I don't care what you vote, go and vote. People have died for this. It's very important. Democracy is important. Don't let it wither away. Go and vote. Thank you, everybody, indeed, for taking part. And thank you particularly, Sue and Ryan. It's been great, been really interesting. A great pleasure to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.